Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Daniel Benjamin. I'm the president of the American Academy in Berlin, and I'm really delighted that you could join us for tonight's inaugural Gahl Hodges Burt Policy Lecture, which is entitled Rising Anti-Semitism in a Global Context, and it will be delivered by Dr. Sharon Nazarian. I also want to thank you for coming in off the balcony, where one could have the illusion that life could not get any better. This is obviously the topic is a sad one. It's also a positive event tonight, as I will explain in a few moments. It is sad and somewhat astonishing that we are here again. Yesterday, President Macron of France condemned the defacement of a Holocaust memorial in Paris. Jewish communal authorities there say the number of such incidents since October 7th have totaled the same number as the incidents of the last 3 years. So that's just in 8 months, 7 months. Similar reports have been made all over Europe, and you only need to have followed, if you do such things, the Eurovision contest to know just how vicious some of these outbursts can be. In Germany, where incidents have also skyrocketed, a middle-aged religious man was, according to the Jüdische Allgemeine, thrown to the ground on Brunnenstrasse just this week and run into repeatedly by an assailant on an electric scooter. Bystanders did nothing but film the event until a 17-year-old girl from the same community came to his rescue. Of course, this is by no means a strictly European problem. The director of the FBI, Christopher Wray, has spoken of anti-Semitism sentiment and acts reaching historic levels in America, and one only has to tune into the coverage of the campus protests to get a sense of just how ugly things have gotten. And to be clear, obviously, many and perhaps most protesters have emphasized that their focus is on events in Gaza, but there are still those like the Columbia student who said, Zionists don't deserve to live, and that, of course, is another category. So it's all quite shocking, and I'm especially pleased that tonight Sharon will discuss the sharply rising numbers of anti-Semitic incidents and attitudes, the shared features of anti-Semitism around the globe, as well as the need to understand rising anti-Semitism as a global trend. And although it is a grim subject, it's fortuitous because Sharon and I first talked about her coming here long before October 7th, and I'm really thrilled that she is coincidentally or accidentally here now. So, as I said, the subject is a grim one, but the occasion is for us at the Academy also a positive one. The Gahl Burt Fellowship is designed to bring outstanding U.S. individuals from the policy world to Berlin each year for a stay of several weeks. The fellowship aims to advance the bilateral conversation and increase the clarity of understanding between the U.S. and Germany, as is so much of what we do here at the Academy, and I'm glad that we're getting to expand our ambit. The fellowship is named for our indispensable trustee, Gahl Burt. A member of our board since the Academy's founding in 1994, which I should add was 4 years before we even opened our doors, Gahl has provided guidance of the highest quality to the Academy since the outset, and she has been extraordinarily generous with introductions to her enormous network of friends and acquaintances in the creative, scholarly, and policy worlds. And she has worked tirelessly to strengthen our institution. Gahl served as chairwoman of the Academy's board from 2015 to 2020. She remains on the board to this day, and her wise leadership has helped the Academy navigate a period of some challenge. Gahl Burt was started out as an assistant to Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. She was then the White House Social Secretary to President and Mrs. Ronald Reagan, and she has generously given of her time and energy to support an array of nonprofit institutions, including the International Republican Institute, the List Project, and the Polyphony Foundation. She has been a strong advocate for the education of women and girls. She's worked at the State Department to bring Afghan women to the United States for their high school years. The Gahl Hodges Burt Policy Fellowship honors Gahl's extraordinary service to the American Academy in Berlin, to the German-American relationship, and to the highest ideals of American engagement in the world. So now to introduce our speaker. We are thrilled that Dr. Sharon Nazarian is our inaugural Gahl Burt Fellow, because she too exemplifies America's engagement in the world. She is spending a month here at the Academy, and to judge by her first couple of weeks, she will have met every individual in the policy community in Berlin by the time she finishes. I was saying to her over dinner that I thought it was going to be a race to see whether she or our staff keel over first. We're not going to let that happen. Sharon is the president of the Y.N.S. Nazarian Family Foundation, and she is the founder and chair of the Eunice and Soraya Nazarian Center for Israel Studies at the University of California at Los Angeles, and she also sits on the board of governors of the University of Haifa. In 2017, the Anti-Defamation League, which I think is known to everyone, appointed Sharon as Senior Vice President for International Affairs, and in that capacity, which she held for 5 years, she was chief diplomat and policymaker of the ADL, meeting with heads of state, foreign ministers, leaders of Jewish communities all around the world to advance ADL's initiatives for fighting anti-Semitism and racial hatred globally. And during this period, she also oversaw ADL's office in Israel. She currently serves as a member of ADL's National Board. She is also a trustee of Freedom House, which is something that the American Academy is closely tied to, and she is also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Sharon holds a PhD from USC, where she also received her bachelor's and master's. I got that right? Good, okay. Her talk will last about 30 or 40 minutes. It will be followed by an onstage discussion and audience Q&A. If you are here, please raise your hand. If you're in the Zoom, watching us in Zoom, please type your question into the Q&A part of the Zoom platform. I have a feeling there are going to be a few questions. So I would like to just say at the outset, please, please, please keep your questions rather short, say a minute. Make sure there's a question mark at the end. And that way we can get in as many questioners as possible. Sharon, it's a complete pleasure to have you here. Welcome to the Academy.
Thank you so much, Dan, for that warm welcome. And indeed, what a pleasure for me to be here in this, what I call slice of heaven. I want to start by thanking the Academy for hosting me here. It is really an opportunity of a lifetime. The schedule that you heard Dan just refer to is my norm. Traveling the world and meeting with Jewish communities, with leadership, government, civil society, makes a very busy schedule of my normal life. So to have a month here in Berlin, this beautiful city of yours, that I'm really envious of actually, except for the traffic, I have to say. Traffic with LA kind of competes. Yesterday I was stuck in bad traffic. It's really, really a privilege. So Dan and the Academy team, I cannot thank you enough for having me and my husband Fernando here and allowing us to really delve deep into German society, into the issues that you're challenging with and facing. All right, I'm going to start by telling you a story, and I'll start in a personal way, which is very rare for me. As you can imagine, the story of anti-Semitism and the work that we do is grim, it's difficult, and especially so now. But I will tell you by telling a personal story, and hopefully you'll see why. My father was born in January 1931, a second-class citizen in the Jewish quarter, or Mahalleh, of the capital city of Tehran, Iran. He was legally designated ghetto, and Jews were not allowed to leave their homes if it rained. Given the fear that the rainwater touching Jewish bodies would render Muslims impure, Jews were considered najis, or impure. In 1978, just as Iran was pushing for modernization and secularization, the drums of an impending revolution began to beat. And my father, just as millennia of Jewish fathers had before him, made the excruciating decision for us to leave our homeland with few possessions and to seek refuge and safety in Israel and then eventually in the US. We knew that the doors to our homeland would forever be closed once we saw the revolution, which had sought to actually bring democracy and freedom, get hijacked and captured by fundamentalist Islamist forces. That revolution began on Iran's university campuses with idealistic young students demanding freedom and democracy from the authoritarian Shah of Iran, the king. It took every sector of Iranian society, from the students to bazaris who were merchants, from the Marxist intellectuals to rural and mostly illiterate and deeply religious peasants, to topple the Shah. But it was the Islamists who were best organized and were able to capture the revolution with their anti-American and anti-Israeli fervor, the big Satan and the little Satan. And they took Iran back to the Dark Ages, a forced hijab for women, and yet another form of authoritarian repression for all. And for one of its first acts, the new Islamic regime murdered the leader of our Jewish community, accusing him of dual loyalty while branding him a Zionist spy and corrupter on earth. The centrality of anti-Americanism and anti-Israel fervor and anti-Zionism continues to haunt us today, as you will see with the rest of my story. A final note on Iran. Since the 1979 revolution, Iran has joined the ranks of other ancient Middle Eastern Jewish communities in its march toward extinction. So today, when anti-Israel and anti-Zionist protesters use the slogan ethnic cleansing against the state of Israel, Mizrahi Jews, or Middle Eastern Jews like myself, point to the hypocrisy of such accusations. Once a community of almost 1 million Jews in Arab countries and Iran in 1948, today fewer than 12,000 remain. Thousands of years of history and culture annihilated, billions of dollars of assets seized, whole communities forced in exile like mine. So that's the personal story that brought me to ADL in 2017. And I'll tell you more about it later, but I do want to tell you a little bit about ADL. I know that Dan said most of you are familiar with ADL, but I'm not sure if everybody knows its beginning. ADL was founded in 1913, at a time in the US when the Jewish community faced rampant anti-Semitism and overt discrimination. Books, plays, and above all newspapers depicted Jews with crude stereotypes. Against this backdrop of bigotry and intolerance, an attorney from the Chicago named Sigmund Livingston put forward a bold idea: to create an organization with a mission to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice and fair treatment to all. The Anti-Defamation League was founded with a clear understanding that the fight against one form of prejudice, Jew hatred, could not succeed without battling prejudice in all forms. During this time, an event in Georgia made the need for the organization painfully clear. Leo Frank, a Jewish businessman who moved to Atlanta to manage his family's pencil factory, was convicted of the rape and murder of a 13-year-old female employee. Following a trial that was defined by anti-Semitism, the governor reduced Frank's death sentence to life in prison. After that, a hate-filled mob, which included many influential community members, dragged Frank from his prison cell and lynched him. It wasn't until many years, decades later, at ADL's urging, that the state of Georgia finally issued Frank a posthumous pardon. Since then, ADL has come to be known as the leading anti-hate organization in the US, and through its venerable history of investigations to uncover Nazi hate groups, filing Supreme Court amicus briefs, fighting restrictive housing covenants that targeted the Black community and the Jewish community, fighting for the American value of church-state separation, and fighting against anti-Jewish and anti-Black discrimination in employment, housing, and accommodation, as well as barriers to college and university admissions. ADL fought 6 southern states and 50 communities to enact laws that banned the wearing of masks during demonstrations, leading to a dramatic decrease in Ku Klux Klan membership. Once they had to show their face, then they knew. But the real story I want to tell tonight is about the most secure, integrated, and successful Jewish community going from its golden age of safety to one of vulnerability. And as a result of 4 watershed events I'll mention, and in a matter of 6 short years. The 2017 Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville did have another very personal impact on my life. At that rally, men and women bearing tiki torches shouted, "Jews will not replace us." This, in some way, was similar to the way that Jews around the world felt the horrors of being singled out and being hated. For me, those tiki torches represented the same zealotry as the people who had hijacked my homeland. It presented an assault on the vision that my father had brought us to America for, seeking freedom, protection, and safety. And they took the first shot at shattering our American sense of safety and security. Then unabashedly maskless extremists introduced a new set of vocabulary and conspiracy-laden ideology, such as QAnon and the Great Replacement Theory, into our lives. My life personally was permanently altered by that event, because that is the event that led me to my decision to leave academia and philanthropy and devote my career to fighting anti-Semitism by joining ADL as a professional executive. The voice in my head kept reminding me that my father didn't uproot us from our country of birth to this land of freedom, for that freedom to be pilfered by hate-mongering extremists. And you heard a little bit about my work. My work was really a global mission, bringing ADL's mission to every Jewish community around the world, understanding their needs, looking how we could be a resource. And I'm very happy to tell you I have one of my former team members right here, Dalia Greenfeld, who represents ADL here in Berlin. We worked together. I would come here with her, and I visited many of you. But the next schism in our American Jewish psyche came with the 2018 terror attack on the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, where the largest number of Jews in American Jewish history were massacred. That event alone altered the lives of Jews, of Jewish institutions, where security guards and communal security organizations became a part of our daily lives. Probably it's hard for you in Berlin to understand. Before that, you could walk into any synagogue in America. There were very few security guards. Those were open forums for a community to gather. That reality is gone. The first address I gave days after that horrific event was in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And I really remember having to edit the remarks that I would usually use when addressing the communities. Normally, I would say, we are from America. We are understandably safe and secure, and we're here to help you. How can we be a resource? After that event, my narrative had to change. My narrative became one, I am here to learn from you. I'm here to listen to you, and I'm here to learn how to keep our institutions safe the way you are. January 6, 2021, the insurrection and the hate-filled mob attack on the US Capitol represented for me and for many American Jews not only an assault on the very fabric of our democracy, but also the inseparable linkage of the mob's illiberal, anti-democratic ideology with vile anti-Semitic hate. As with all minorities, the vulnerabilities we feel surface when the institutions we have placed our trust in come under attack. And there was no clearer assault on those very institutions than the horrifying events of that day. For me personally, again, no other event, none, since the 1979 revolution shook me to my core the way January 6th did. I grieve for my father's decision, for his yearning for safety and security, and looking at my new homeland under attack for the very values and principles that we all had come to America for. So those three watershed events taking place back to back in a matter of 4 short years presented in no uncertain terms the onslaught against American Jewish life and American freedom and democracy. And then came October 7th, 2023. An attack by a US-designated terror group Hamas against Israeli civilians in southern Israel, where the largest number of Jews were killed in one day since the Holocaust. Where Israel's failure to protect its citizens was showcased as the greatest military failure in Israel's history. At a time of internal democratic turmoil in Israel, this assault and the ensuing trauma of kidnapped hostages and the reverberations of that trauma impacted every Jewish community around the globe, including ours. And it presented us with a dark new reality. Within days, the US Jewish community was faced with the largest increase in anti-Semitic incidents since ADL has kept records. The front page of the newspapers announced, quote, "The golden age on American Jewry was over." We went from decades of low anti-Semitic attitudes to an ever-increasing one. After a steady decline in anti-Semitic attitudes in the US from 1964 to 2019, 2020 presented a great leap in the number of Americans agreeing with Jewish tropes when surveyed. And then came 2024, the latest polling ADL has released. There are really no surprises here, but the scale is what is unprecedented. Those who fall into the Holocaust denial camp also believe in conspiracy theories and are more susceptible to hold views that are anti-Semitic. Younger people endorse more anti-Jewish tropes. Holocaust denial is way up. Imagine The Economist having that on the cover. And especially younger Americans are prone to the denialism of the Holocaust. This one is new for us. The data showed that more young American people are willing to accept a more sanitized narrative of Hamas and therefore be friends with someone who is more accepting of Hamas. From the drastic increase in anti-Semitic attitudes, we also began to see a tremendous increase in actual acts of anti-Semitism. I do want to explain that when ADL collects its anti-Semitic audit of incidents, especially in the US, where we have 25 offices and we're very deeply immersed in each of the communities, every single incident has to be verified. Our data is not just by someone calling and saying that I was assaulted. Every report has to be factually verified, investigated, and only then will it be added to the audit of incidents that we have. By the way, you can ask Dalia all about that afterwards. She's very immersed about kind of the Berlin and the German data. So the tsunami of anti-Semitic incidents was very clear when we look at the month-to-month differential. And notice that here you have the numbers exploding even before Israel had gone into Gaza. Keep that fact in mind. We started looking at new ways of gathering data, which was looking at anti-Semitic incidents at anti-Israel rallies. And you can see that this was something we had never measured before. And yet, it is now a phenomenon we have to understand, and we have to explain, and we have to count. The assault on Jewish institutions in America also changed. For the first time, we had massive number of bomb threats used as a mechanism of intimidation and disruption of Jewish life at synagogues, at Jewish day schools, at Jewish community centers. We have another new mechanism used by the anti-Semites, which is called swatting. It is essentially calling the SWAT team, saying that there's a bomb when there is no bomb, and having the police, the most elite part of the police, enter the Jewish institution, disrupt everything, put fear in those people thinking there is a bomb, and yet finding that there's nothing there. So swatting is now a new phenomenon in America, and I think also in other countries. And anti-swatting legislation is something ADL is definitely at the forefront of. You've all heard about doxing, which is another intimidation tactic of publicly posting the names and private information of Jewish leaders or others, by the way. This is not just targeting the Jews, but this is for sure something that's been of a huge issue. I can tell you in Australia, many of the artists, Jewish artists in the Australian community were targeted with doxing, where their home address was released, and demonstrations took place in front of their homes. So anti-doxing legislation is something else ADL is at the forefront of. This is something else new. We're seeing anti-Semitic incidents taking place at kindergarten to elementary to middle school and high schools. And this is not just bullying. As you can see, harassment, vandalism, and even assault. This is from 5-year-olds to 16, 17-year-olds. And we're seeing the kinds of propaganda in a middle school library, a public school, where Hamas is glorified. University students have been especially at the forefront of all these new difficult trends. The reporting that we're getting and the data that we just released on survey of US Jewish students on campuses tells us that American Jewish students are afraid, are intimidated. They don't want to show up for class. If they do, they don't want to discuss their Jewishness. They're videoed, they're harassed. And therefore, they feel isolated. One of the biggest concerns we have for the fall, now is the end of the term, and we'll talk about the encampments a little bit, but one of our biggest concerns is a campaign that's really been targeting Hillel institutions. Some of you are familiar with Hillel's, which is a Center for Jewish Life on most American campuses. There is a very concerted campaign to get Hillel's kicked off American university campuses. This is where Jewish students go for multi-denominational holidays, for Rosh Hashanah and Hanukkah, where there is kosher meat often, and there's a lot of programming for Jewish and non-Jewish students, whoever wants to go. So they are now the focal point of the attack on campuses. So bottom line, Jewish students are being pushed into the closet, forcibly required to remove their Jewishness, hide their identity, and hide their Zionism, hide their connection with the land of Israel. And every poll, one after another, shows that most Jews, not only American, but around the world, connect their identity with the state of Israel. And so to be forced to hide that part of their identity is as bad as hiding their Magen David or their kippah. So the October 7th world in some ways has cemented the feelings of American Jews and their insecurity. And the story that I've just told is really being replicated around the world. I know for a fact, for the 2 weeks that I've been here, some of the trends I've just described also are here in Berlin. I've spoken with heads of universities, I've spoken with heads of institutions, and I know that these trends are familiar. But I do want to tell you that in all my years of work, I have never experienced trends that are exactly identical, that the narratives that the communities are facing are so similar. From UK and Europe to North America and Latin America, from Africa and South Africa specifically, to the Middle East, and even Australia. I was invited to Sydney about 3 weeks ago, before I came here, on the 6-month commemoration of October 6th. That community had essentially become paralyzed since October 9th. And that image, I don't know how many of you remember, on October 9th, on the steps of the Sydney Opera House, a massive pro-Hamas demonstration was held. At that demonstration, chants of gas to Jews were heard by the Jewish community. I have to say that since then, investigation of the audio of those chants have been released, and Sydney police believes that those were not the exact words. Whatever the first word was, and I won't get into, it was another bad word they think it was, which starts with an F. But the second word was Jews. So the Sydney Jewish community, one of the safest Jewish communities as far as I'm concerned, was told that you cannot show up, that we cannot keep you safe. And for 6 months, the same pattern of events that I just described happened on their campuses, to their students, to their Jewish institutions. And so 6 months later, they invited me to come to the very first community-wide event they had, and it was called Taking Back the Opera House. And they filled up the Sydney Opera House with 2,000 members of the Jewish community. And I was lucky enough to be one of the keynotes. But that community was amazing to me in that they really didn't know what to do. And I'll add one more fact about the Australian Jewish community. From what I'm told, they have the largest number of Holocaust survivors outside Israel, in Australia, between Melbourne and Sydney. So imagine the intergenerational trauma. Imagine the triggering of that community, where I would be speaking with people of my generation, and they said, our parents are telling us we need to leave. And I said, but where are you going to go? And you're not there yet. So the only piece of advice I could give them to calm them was to say, you have been blessed until now. You haven't needed security guards in front of your institutions. By the way, I forgot a very important point. That week was the week that Iran-Israel military strikes were taking place. So imagine the sense of fear and security and the responsibility of the community to gather 2,000 people in such an iconic location. We know that soft targets has been a history of many bad actors, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. So here we are. Similar trends. Dan referred to some of the increases in anti-Semitic incidents. I'll just throw them out. I know they don't mean much, but you'll see they're all triple digit. Brazil, up 960%. France, 384%. Germany, 320%. UK, 589. US, 360. Australia, 482 year-on-year percentage increases in anti-Semitic incidents. So just as COVID, I'm going to go back for a second, just as COVID taught us that, viruses don't know borders, we learned the hard way. We need to understand that anti-Semitism also works like a virus. It spreads like a virus. It pops out when society is under pressure and stress, when the cleavages in our society give way to the worst of not only scapegoating, but also needing an idea to represent all social ills that are worrying us. So I'm often asked, you have right-wing extremism, you have left-wing extremism, you have Islamist extremism. Which one is the biggest threat? Which one should we be worried about? And I have one answer, always. Can we afford to ignore any of them? We just simply don't have the luxury to do that. So we'll start with right-wing extremism, and I think something that's very front of mind here in Germany today, given the elections coming up. Our ADL Center on Extremism has documented 67 domestic terror incidents by right-wing extremists in the US from 2017 till 2022. These included successful terrorist attacks, failed terrorist attacks, and foiled terrorist plots. White supremacists were responsible for more attacks than any other type of right-wing extremist in the past 6 years, essentially 45%. So the role of white supremacy and its inextricable enmeshment with conspiracy theories is nothing new. But what we have witnessed over the past decade is the normalization and mainstreaming of such ideologies. And I cannot let it be unsaid that former President Trump had a role to play in that, in the normalization. The ideologies were there. They've always been there. But bringing that and normalizing it as part of everyday American life, we have to hold our leaders responsible. And for that act, I do. And I think ADL does, because we called them out. The Great Replacement Theory was the ideology that was adhered to by the lone wolf terrorist who perpetrated the Tree of Life terror attack in Pittsburgh that I referred to. On that attack, 11 were killed and 16 were wounded. The terrorist who committed that act targeted the Tree of Life because of its support in resettling refugees from Syria, those who were fleeing atrocities committed by their President Assad. It was the revered American Jewish refugee organization, HIAS, for some of you who are familiar with HIAS, that had garnered many Jewish synagogues to help resettle refugees in America, as you have done so graciously in this country. When the perpetrator was arrested, at the moment of his arrest, he said, quote, "We need all the Jews to die because Jews are committing genocide against my people," essentially the white Christian people of America. So what has happened since October 7th? The anti-Semitic propaganda that often centered on the classic hatred of Jewish people, rooted in racism and white supremacy, has now become increasingly prevalent in mainstream social media within the Zionist context. We see that with increasing October 7th denialism and explicit or implicit calls for violence against both Jews and Zionists. Currently, a very significant social media campaign is spreading widely on white supremacist platforms using content that had been directly taken from Hamas terrorist GoPro cameras on October 7th. So they're using what Hamas did and saying that for that reason, Jews and Zionists need to die. So since October 7th, we now have a whole new category of conspiracy theories, which is October 7th denial. The extreme left ideology, from Antifa to Marxist-Leninists, Trotsky supporters, from the ideology best exemplified by Jeremy Corbyn in the left extremes of the British Labour Party, and I would say the DSA, Democrats, Socialists of America, and the US, the greater willingness to engage in anti-Zionist, anti-Israel, and anti-Semitic narratives as part of their anti-colonialist advocacy has become a mainstay also. After October 7th, a number of US university professors expressed inflammatory views celebrating Hamas's actions on October 7th as heroic or as an achievement, and calling for Zionists to remove themselves from Israel or suggesting they should be physically assaulted. They've expressed these sentiments at anti-Israel rallies, on social media, and in published essays. For some, their arguments are rooted in the false notion that Israel is a foreign settler colonial power, no different from the 19th century European colonists in Africa and the Middle East. And as such, Israelis do not have the right to safety and security. Some professors cheered Hamas for putatively shifting the balance of power in the Middle East and bringing Palestinians closer to gaining control of Israel. In their view, Israel does not have the right to exist, and any kind of action taken to end its existence is justified. Therefore, the slogan, any means necessary. This narrative has been taken as far as showing support and regard for the North Korean regime. That's what that video was. I'm not going to show you the video. But this is a Columbia student, Columbia University student, having a teach-in, talking about why the North Korean regime should be revered and should be honored, not only for its solidarity with the Palestinians, not only for training Palestinian terrorists, but also because it stands up to America. And finally, we can emphatically agree that violence is certainly not the monopoly of the far right or the far left. And beyond acts of Islamist terrorism, we have already started seeing, even before October 7th, increased acts of violence, which began in the May 2021 Israel-Hamas war that led to actual violence perpetrated by then we called pro-Palestinian mobs. One of those events took place in my city of Los Angeles. I'm sure it made it to the media here, where a convoy of Palestinians with Palestinian flags made it through a Jewish neighborhood in Los Angeles, reached a sushi restaurant, got out, and asked, "Who is a Jew?" A number of Jewish Iranian young men who were having sushi got up and said, "We're Jewish." And they were beaten up. And a major brawl followed suit, and the police came. So until that, Israel-Hamas battle of 2021, we really hadn't seen the kind of physical violence coming from, again, far left groups that were not necessarily Islamic terrorists. And that war was, in a way, a beginning for understanding what are we dealing with, both in terms of social media and what happens from what goes on in social media into the real world. So we've all been seeing a lot about US campuses. the encampments, the desire of many American students to advocate for Palestinian rights, and I would say justifiably so. I think both in America and in academia, we have a revered history of political protests in America. And remember what I told you about Iran. In Iran, too, this wonderful movement for democracy and freedom started in universities. But I do want to tell you the story of Students for Justice in Palestine, because they have been the main organizer of most of the encampments, most of the slogans, most of the messaging in a very systematic and I would say organized, highly organized fashion. An in-depth report about National Students for Justice in Palestine was published by the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy. And it explained that the national body, the National Students for Justice in Palestine, was actually founded in 2010 at the U.S. Social Forum's Palestine program, which was co-sponsored by the BDS National Committee, a coalition with multiple U.S.-designated terror organizations, including Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. Since its first convention, NSJP, which is the national body, since their first conferences have featured live videos and lectures from convicted terrorists and expressed support for terrorists on social media. NSJP held its first official congress in 2011 at Columbia University, and today claims to have more than 350 chapters at American and Canadian universities. I actually saw a heat map by them showing the campuses where they have now encampments, and it goes way beyond US and Canada. Obviously, you've had it here at Freie University. You've had different manifestations, but definitely goes beyond US and Canada. SJP promotes BDS campaigns against Israel, specializes in using confrontational tactics, including disrupting student-run pro-Israel events, intimidation, and rioting. And I've had personal experience with this at UCLA, and I'll tell you about it. After the October 7th atrocities, the National Students for Justice in Palestine explicitly endorsed the actions of Hamas and the armed attack on Israeli civilians, and voiced an increasingly radical call for confronting and dismantling Zionism on U.S. college campuses. Some SJB chapters issued pro-Hamas messaging and or promoted violent anti-Israel messaging channels. So much more needs to be really understood and investigated regarding the systematic nature and the financial backing of the existing SJP chapters and the national one. I'm not here to tell you where that comes from, but I can tell you through speaking with many university presidents, the description of when the encampment started was exactly the same. Multiple very large trucks, which in America are very expensive to get, showed up on campus one day, emptied many, many tents, speakers, all kinds of toolkits for the students. We've seen images, all the pictures were the same of the tents, same uniform. And so presidents are telling me, does ADL know who is organizing all this? Where is the money coming from? This is not an organic student-led issue. So the jury's still out. I will not make any hypothesizing about who's behind what. That's not my job. But I know that in the US Senate and in US Congress, already congressional leaders are looking at both tax and other investigation of financial funding of some of these groups. So the narratives coming out of not only what we're seeing on campuses, but what we're seeing on social media is one that at the same time we've heard, and there's not much new, and yet it is still very, very disturbing. And there is a twist. There is a somehow same with the student talking about North Korea. There's kind of an almost disbelief in the way some of the conflations that are taking place. The rebranding of Hamas from an oppressive terror group to the face of anti-American resistance is really a big part of that narrative. And we have to understand that as part of that rebranding, immersed deeply and connected to it is this phenomenon of denialism. Deborah Lipstadt, the U.S. Special Envoy on monitoring and combating anti-Semitism, and a very revered Holocaust scholar, I think said it best. She said that after the Holocaust, it took at least 2 decades before real Holocaust denialism became apparent and really something that public knowledge. In this case, it took a matter of days and weeks. So what we're seeing is that the narratives are not who's to blame, who perpetrated what, how far back do we go. It's actually that it didn't happen. The Nova Festival, massacre, rape, mutilation of women did not happen. That's the narratives we're being exposed to right now. So, a virus that is global, patterns that are being repeated in country and city after city. We saw this was all within a week or 2 of October 7th at every major capital. Mass demonstrations. I don't know if any of you have put any sort of public events together. This takes time, this takes energy. And they showed up like this. So we all know the role of social media today. I'm not going to tell you anything new about it, and we have amazing experts in the room that I'll be meeting with as well to talk about the dangers of online hate. I do want to cite the Global Project Against Hate and Extremism, which noted that there was a nearly 500% increase in both anti-Semitic and Islamophobic narratives on fringe platforms like 4chan, Gab, and BitChute. They follow those platforms specifically because they're known for long-standing connection to racially motivated anti-Semitic mass shootings, such as the one that took place, the racist one that took place at the Buffalo murders in 2022. Anti-Semitic slurs and calls for violence went from 484 instances in October 6th to 2,626 on October 8th. And we can find these not just on those offshoot platforms, but on X, on Facebook, and on LinkedIn. On October 11th, here in Europe, the European Union demanded Meta crack down on Israel-Hamas disinformation. Meta was given 24 hours to respond and comply with European law, pointing to a surge in misinformation about the Israel-Hamas conflict, including doctored images and mislabeled videos. I'm not going to go much deeper into this idea of kind of online hate. I'm not going to touch AI. It's just too big of a puzzle for us to try to tackle. We will hopefully be having a workshop at the end of the month here where at the Academy, we'll study this a little bit more together. But know that the various types of anti-Semitic content online, while traditional anti-Semitic rhetoric is still very high, the Israel-related one is just as high and catching up quickly. This points to the comprehensive merging of the anti-Semitic and anti-Israel and anti-Zionist narratives. So for a long time, academics, researchers insisted on maintaining this distinction between anti-Israeli rhetoric and anti-Semitism. And we did too as ADL. We said that criticism of Israeli policy is protected speech. But today, those distinctions are fading away because the slogans, the rhetoric, the narratives being used do not distinguish between Israel policymakers, between Prime Minister Netanyahu and his coalition, between members of his coalition who are highly problematic, and I would say some racist. Those distinctions are not made. It is the Zionists, it is the Jews. From 2020 to 2024, an international team of 20 researchers coordinated by the Center for Research on Anti-Semitism here at the Technical University Berlin investigated where and how anti-Semitism manifests in comment sections of mainstream media in the UK, France, and Germany. According to Dr. Becker, the events of October 7, 2023 have given rise to a completely new form of anti-Semitic communication on an international scale. Quote, in no preceding escalation phase of the Arab-Israeli conflict has the predominant anti-Semitic reaction been one of open jubilation and joy over the death of Israeli Jews. So, what is really clear to us today? We know that ideological extremism in all its form has to be viewed as the greatest threat. We have to recognize that what we're seeing on campuses is an alliance that is forming and has already formed between the extreme left and radical Islam. I'm not sure how many of you saw in those campus photos. You readily saw flags of Hezbollah. You saw language and slogans revering the Houthis of Yemen, PFLP. Something's going on here, and it's dangerous. And we're also seeing a horseshoe effect between the narratives of the far right and the far left. We're seeing them mimic one another, replicate each other's messaging, and using Zionism and anti-Zionism while couching their own ideology, but the target is the same. We already talked a little bit about the role of social media. We have a lot more work to do there. And I do want to circle back to my country of birth. This is the horseshoe effect. This is the best depiction of the horseshoe effect. This was a home of a Holocaust survivor outside Brussels. When you see the swastika and Free Gaza spray painted by the same person, that's the horseshoe effect. So, you in Germany have been through a tough time because of Russia and Ukraine. That war is front of mind, and justifiably so. So the notion of bad actors and the role they play in disrupting our lives, disrupting our cities, disrupting our elections, spreading disinformation and misinformation is nothing new for you. What I would like to posit here tonight is that Islamic Republic of Iran should be added to the list of Russia and China as such a bad actor on the international stage. As far as we're concerned at ADL, the Islamic Republic of Iran is the #1 state sponsor of terrorism, of Holocaust denial, and anti-Semitism. State-sponsored. The Iranian regime has held Holocaust denial cartoon contests. During COVID, the number of reports that came out from Iran blaming the Jews for the virus and blaming the Jews for finding the vaccine were more than any other government in the world. And this minister on public television in Iran comfortably said that those students on US campuses in Persian, and the video is available if anybody wants it, those are our students. If America ever does anything that's aggressive towards us, those students, those American students on American campuses will defend us. Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, personally thanked the American students and students across the world. President Raisi of Iran congratulated them for their resistance, any means necessary. This is the Iranian Jewish community today in Tehran. They have to systematically come out and demonstrate against Israel, against America. They had to hand out candy after October 7th on the streets of Tehran to celebrate what happened on October 7th. This is what we call a captured community. These are Jewish communities where their only survival is to survive, any means necessary. So this community pays the price. And I always worry when I say these things in public if they're going to pay a price for it. But they know. They know that we know. They know that we talk about it. And so this is the reality of that community. So the final message I want to leave you with is that many of the variables I've laid out for you, number one is familiar, is knowable, but the scale, the pace, the rapidity of change is just something we cannot look away from. The trends I've described are also indicative of a much deeper and bigger problem. Deterioration in the trust in democratic institutions and values, questioning of democratic systems to give answers to what the people and citizens need and want, polarization brought on by populist politicians offering simple solutions to complex problems and scapegoating different minorities, alienation of so many in our society due to globalization, rapid changes in what's working in the workplace. These are all factors you all know about, you've all read about. Technological disruptions, God help us with that one. I'm not going to even try to think about the deep fakes and the social networks, what's ahead for all of us. And geopolitical reconfigurations. I mean, just look at the country of Turkey. Look at President Erdogan. Where is he? Literally from month to month, you cannot gauge. Is he pro-Israel? Is he anti-Israel? Is he pro-Jewish? Is he anti-Jewish? So at the end of the road, I have to say that standing here in this beautiful place, on this revered Lake Wannsee, facing a very sad part of German history, the Wannsee Conference that I visited on Yom HaShoah, none of that is taken granted by me. I'm here to learn, I'm here to listen. I hope I've shared a little bit of my learnings, my teachings with all of you. And this is a lot of complexities that to capture in a little bit of time was a real challenge, I have to tell you. But I have to tell you that the US government, following your government and many other Europeans, did come up with a national strategy to combat anti-Semitism. We need a whole of society approach. And we know that we cannot legislate our way out of this. That's definitely something we learned from Germany. This government has been really the gold standard. And I have to say that publicly here. The gold standard in protecting its Jewish communities, in helping the revitalization of its Jewish communities, in investing in its Jewish communities. But the trends we're seeing in Germany are very similar to what we see across other countries. So legislation is a piece, but it's not everything. We need a whole of society approach. Those kind of, I'll go back. That kind of strategy, it exists. It cannot be sitting on shelves and gathering dust. It has to be implemented. It has to be pushed down to every caliber of our society, every level. And we have to know that, after all, what is really at stake here is our democracy. Thank you very much.
think we could probably stay for a few more days. But so one of the through lines, I'm just ask a few questions and we'll throw it open because I know everyone here has thoughts. One of the through lines of your talk is that this is not spontaneous, there's something conspiratorial here. The sudden trucks showing up, the masses of social media, so on and so forth. You put your finger on Iran, and understandably so, and this is pretty well documented, and there's no question in anyone's mind that Iran is the #1 state sponsor of terrorism. I think that most scholars of the subject would not say that they are the most capable actor on the international stage, not when it comes to terrorism, but to, shall we say, fomenting trouble in other people's backyards. And so I wanted to ask you, who else do you see as being in this mix? Or am I misunderstanding what you said? Because it does sound as though, it's just all too orchestrated.
Well, look, again, I don't do financial tracking. That's not what EDL does. It's not our business. It will come out, I believe so. I think there's some work to be done there. But in terms of bad actors, let's look at and connect some dots. The Iranian regime, in my view, as a political scientist, has essentially expanded its realm of influence, I would argue, more than any other country. If you think about Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, we can add Hamas and Gaza to it. So I think it's a pretty big bad actor that I would say is sophisticated. We at ADL have looked at the social media platforms that Iran has. Press TV is in English. They have a very large Spanish language, and they have, I think, up to 7, 8, 9, 10 other languages daily. If you ever go on X, on Twitter, they have live panel conversations. Press TV is always on. So I would say they are sophisticated in disinformation, misinformation, causing the kind of distrust in our institutions. You can always see when Black Lives Matter happened. Guess what Khamenei said? He said, look how racist America is. And of course it was. But why is he commenting on that? So you see the investment in showing the corruption of America, the fact that it doesn't show up for its people, and very similar to, I would say, Russia and China. Same. There's not that much difference. But I'm just saying, let's add Iran to that list.
So when we have our workshop, we'll open the aperture a bit, but without having a lot of hard data in front of me, I would just say I think we need to think more about Russia and China and those whose interests are not limited to anti-Semitism, but rather social division, Absolutely. More broadly speaking. So I've been looking at some of the statistics, and of course there has been an increase in anti-Semitic activity going well back into the last decade. But there is a big step function, a big step that, as you pointed out, in talking about Charlottesville, comes in 2017. You have Charlottesville and the Tree of Life shooting. And you talked about President Trump. And, it seems as though he created a structure of permission for people on the fringes of society in a way that has been a game changer. And it seems as though that, what the American president does affects not just America, but affects the whole world. So there were all those, memes with George Soros and Janet Yellen and Lloyd Blankfein of Goldman Sachs and all kinds of other people. What did ADL do? What can anyone do against that?
I was really privileged to testify before a congressional committee on one of the reports that ADL came out with, which was the internationalization of white supremacy. So we were one of the first to really talk about and document the linkages between American QAnon, Great Replacement Theory extremists with European ones. We documented where they showed up, the kinds of influence that they had of one another, the manifestos of one another they referenced. And I think we were the first to actually talk about the gaming industry as being one of the most important, essentially, recruiting sites for young, disaffected, white male. So our research has been important, and I'm very proud to say that. And I have to say that part of what you do here, Dan, at the Academy, in strengthening the transatlantic relationship is part of the solution. We can no longer afford to look only in our own backyards. And that report was groundbreaking in that it said we need to work together because they're working together. And so the strong German-American relations are critically important. You know, QAnon landed here. We exported it to you. I'm so sorry. But it was an American ideology that came and landed here and in France and other places. So that's one of the answers. And you're doing it here. And we need to just do a lot more of it and talk to each other more and compare best practices. And we share. I think we're pretty good at information sharing. You know this better than I do. But it's more also about the ideologies behind it.
So I realize it's a little later than I thought. I'm going to ask one quick question, then open it up. And it's a little warm in here, but I thought we can go a little late if people are prepared to. So the interesting thing, you know, one of the most quoted of lines from a poet in recent years is that history, now I've forgotten it, history may not repeat itself, but it may rhyme.
Yes.
I got that wrong somehow, but it's close enough.
Right.
And what I think is different in terms of this episode of anti-Semitism, and that is worth noting, is that the context is quite different. At least in America, the polling has been pretty clear that Jews have never been more accepted in American life. So Pew, which is the gold standard in polling in the U.S., I think put something out last year that noted that when Americans, writ large, look at different religious groups, no one is more accepted than the Jews.
It's true, absolutely.
They're more accepted than mainline Protestants, Catholics, evangelical Christians, atheists, more. You go down the line. Different groups there, which, of course, is a far cry from the famous Tom Lehrer song, of 100 years ago, which were 100 years ago, 50 years ago, which was, has the punchline "and everyone hates the Jews," National Brotherhood Week, for those of you who grew up on Tom Lehrer. So it's a very different universe. And there was also another Pew study or Gallup study. Would you vote for a Jew for president? And now the Jews are above the Protestants. So this is, for someone who grew up on Holocaust education, this was really kind of a surprise. So I guess the question that I have is, should we view this as a serious, dangerous fringe phenomenon? Or should we view this as something that, is a dagger pointed at our societies? How do we integrate this?
I mean, I view historically that anti-Semitism has always been about the Jews and yet about much bigger phenomena. And some of the anxieties that I referenced, when I took the job in 2017, one of my colleagues says, Sharon, the best reference that we to explain anti-Semitism is like the herpes virus. It's always there. It's always in your body. You never can get rid of it. But when your body's under stress, that's when it pops up. So what I would answer to your question is we need to be extremely worried because the incidents are high and also because Jews are not feeling safe. And when Jews don't feel safe, other minorities will then follow. You all know the saying, starts with the Jews, never ends with the Jews. So this is a very important leading indicator that our democratic societies are under great strain. And here's one more indicator. that we better be careful. We better understand that the assaults on our institutions, on our electoral system, all of that, including our minorities, is the big picture here that's under pressure. Our citizens are not getting what they're needed for whatever reason, and that's a whole other story that we can talk about. And we have populist leaders feeding them that, normalizing the kind of conspiracy theories, scapegoating, and hateful ideology that leads to where we've been before, and we don't want to go there again. So I think that's what I say, we have to look at it holistically, and the anti-Semitism part is a leading indicator that things are going the wrong way.
Okay. It's time for you all to have 7 seconds each to ask a question. I'm sorry that we've gone on so long, but there was so much fascinating material. So, hands up. I see a hand. I can't see a face, but yes, right there. Okay.
Thank you. My name is Gahl Deutsch. I'm an attorney here in Berlin. And so the way you describe the situation, what really strikes me is that there is no solidarity of the majority population in a lot of the countries you named here, both I have the impression here in Germany, but also in Great Britain and the United States, in the situation where you have this mass protests against Israel and for the Palestinian cause, you don't see the same kind of support for the victims in this situation. Can you explain this lack of the majority reaction here?
Look, I think the Jewish community tried to have also come together. I think London, some other, and definitely Washington, D.C., we had a large one. But you're absolutely right. The phenomenon that we're seeing, and this is still happening, is this coming together of grievances from those within, I would say, the social justice movement, who have not only tried to, and we saw with Black Lives Matter, tried to dismantle racist institutions, which we should, because we all have racist institutions in our societies. And those who have really focused on the anti-colonialist movement. Some of that rhetoric, some of that ideology, I believe, humbly so, has become conflated. And I think there is ahistoricism, there is lack of information and facts about the Middle East history. I mean, you've seen all the videos when you ask students which river, which sea, they have no idea. That really feeds into it. But I also do think that there's a really belief that, and this showed up in my class. I taught a class, I didn't mention this, last quarter at UCLA, the first of its kind on global anti-Semitism, similar content. And the first day was on October 4th. So I really experienced kind of what we're seeing on campuses in my classroom. And here's the one that was the most telling moment for me in my class. It was almost my next to last class. It was on online anti-Semitism. And that week, I don't know if it went viral here, but in the US, some young students made videos saying, we read the Osama bin Laden manifesto. And it kind of makes sense to us. This was on TikTok. And then another one said, oh, I read it too. I understand now why Osama bin Laden didn't wake up one morning and say, I'm going to put planes through these two Twin Towers. That he had real grievances. That our government is upholding authoritarian regimes and colonialist regimes. I kind of get it. So I come to my classroom and I tell my students, have you seen this thing? As if kind of, can you believe it kind of a thing? And my student put up her hand and she said, I read it. And it makes sense to me, actually. And I said, but let's understand that targeting of civilian buildings under no international law, under no American, there's no law that justifies targeting civilian. Another one put up her hand and she said, no, I get it too. Because freedom movements throughout history have had no choice but to use any means necessary. So then I said, For us, Osama, you've heard this story because I told you, I think, at lunch. I said, for us, Osama bin Laden embodies evil, just like Hitler and Mao and Stalin. I asked my class, to you, who embodies evil? Guess what the answers were? Yes, anybody? No. If they didn't say Israel, it was a class on anti-Semitism, maybe they knew better. First, this was Trump, and the second one was Ronald Reagan. So where does that leave us? They're putting in the same bucket people who are responsible for the murder of thousands and millions of their own citizens, in the same bucket of a former U.S. president whose policies they didn't like for whatever reason, even if they know that. We have a real problem on our hands. So what you're seeing on campuses is some of that, is this idea of the anti-Americanism standing up to America. It's a whole conflation of many different some of it serious and some of it misconstrued and ignorant. And it's this mix that's very dangerous. And students are mimicking and parroting some of this without really understanding.
I would suggest we collect a couple of questions and then Sharon can answer them. And
I'll try to be short in my answer.
And then we'll go have a drink. Yeah. And then one more, and then we'll.
I would like to ask about the role of. My name is Heine Otterbach, and I used to be a teacher. I want to ask about the role of Vladimir Putin and his people. What kind of stories they produce and what kind of narratives they put into our minds, and how we might perhaps not even feel that they are lying to us because we take this for granted and take this as a part of reality. Because, everybody was speaking about the song contest, and at the same time, there was a new attack on the city of Kharkiv. And I mean, I read it in the papers, but people somehow didn't feel it. Nobody commented on it. Everybody was busy with what was happening with these songs. So what is the role of the Russians?
I'll just answer quickly. I am not a Russia expert at all. I know very little about misinformation, disinformation, but I have two pieces of information. Number one, the excuse Russia used to attack Ukraine, what was it? Nazism, number one. Number two, who is now hooked its wagon to Russia? Iran, right? So we have to understand there is a world of democracy and there's a world of those who democracy is the biggest threat to them. Russia, China, Iran. So the more our societies function well, the more threatening that is to them. And so is the reverse. So again, I won't answer more because I'm not really a Russia specialist, but I can tell you it helps all of them when we have havoc on our campuses.
One more question. Do I have a fellow to ask a question? Okay. I can't see the fellow, but...
So my question was, getting down to it in my many arguments with peers on the subject, there is that underlying, ultimately anti-West attitude that comes out. They spit it out at some point in the discussion, right? And so the thing I want to ask is, how do you get someone to realize, I feel like it's a whole restructuring that's required, like their place in the world, and like, these people who have only benefited, of course, growing up in the West and being Westerners, to, I don't know, kind of have a little bit of allegiance to their home, kind of a thing. Obviously not in kind of some kind of blind way, but to understand, who's going to be there for you at the end of the day. And I don't know, how would you best address that? Because I feel like this is all kind of lumped in together.
You know what I would say is have them talk to an immigrant or a refugee who comes to America. That's the best way for them to understand, as I do, as my family does, that when you live the benefits of a democratic society, the privileges that are given to you as an immigrant, as a refugee, you will never take it for granted. So the fact remains that those of you who are born and privileged enough to be born and raised in democracies will take it for granted because you always had it. But talk to an immigrant from anywhere. I'm pretty sure, I may be wrong, but that's my hypothesis, that immigrants to Germany, to America, understand what's at stake. And they understand the dangers, actually, also to our freedoms.
That's a great note to end on. Very quickly, on Tuesday at 7:30, we have composer David Lang here as a distinguished visitor to speak about stripping opera for parts. He is a famous musician and musicologist. On the 6th, we will have the Leah Joyzel. Cried all the talking. Yeah. Leah Joyzel, distinguished visitor, Theaster Gates, world famous artist, and then bringing this full circle. Many of you will have read the great book, The Hare with the Amber Eyes, about bourgeois Jews in France before the disaster. Its author, Edmund Duval, will be giving a lecture here on June 16th. It will be entitled Letters Home. Please do look at the website for more information. It's been wonderful having such a large and engaged crowd tonight, and I think you've all earned a little dessert. So.